Hey there, welcome to the Drawing Codex. If you are an aspiring artist or someone who's interested in drawing and you've been trying to improve your foundational skills, you've probably been told to learn to draw simple geoforms, things like spheres or squares or boxes, cylinders, etc. The question is why? Why do people keep telling you to draw these things, and how does it relate to, especially, in my case, what I'm trying to do here on this channel is talk about how to draw stuff from our imagination. How does drawing this stuff help you draw awesome, cool stuff from your head? That's what I want to talk about in this video. Welcome again to the Drawing Codex, where we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the comic book line and color style of creating illustrations. Now, I spent a lot of time being told to learn to render and draw simple geoforms like this. And honestly, I think a lot of people have trouble sort of really getting on board with this idea. The story is that I spent a lot of time doing it, avoiding, drawing these things, and my work sort of, I think, suffered for it, especially because I was interested in stuff that was cartoony and stylized, and also, but with a lot of structure. That's kind of what I was interested in. I grew up reading those kind of comics, and, I needed to learn perspective and rendering and those kind of things, but, I couldn't really figure out how this related to that. And as soon as I really sort of got on board with studying this, my drawing improved a lot. And overall, structurally, I think really mastering the sort of structural technical drawing has helped me immeasurably, especially when it comes to flexibility and being able to work in slightly different styles and slightly different industries. The question is, how can we sort of approach this, and how can we understand how this might fit into your life and really benefit you? So the question is, if this stuff is so important, why do people have such resistance to it? Now, for me, I think it was just because it was so boring, right? Like rendering this stuff and figuring out how to draw cubes and learning my perspective in a technical way was just a huge pain. I just wanted to draw cool, interesting stuff. I just wanted to draw comic books and that kind of thing. And I could kind of get it, right? I get what people were saying, but I think there's a point at which a lot of artists really understand how important these foundational concepts are and how much they help to improve whatever other art they're doing, especially if you're trying to do it in a technical, sort of artistic way. Now, it's important as a caveat to say that not all artists who are very, very talented and very, very successful, people who have gotten to a high professional level, make excellent livings as an artist, really get on board with this stuff. I know a lot of people who can work in much like very, very stylized ways, who just sort of look at this technical drawing stuff and are kind of like, I don't get it, Tim. I got no idea why you spend or waste any time on that, right? They have just gotten really good by practicing and doing their own thing, day in, day out. So it's possible to do that, and I've always said that. That's one of the main things that I'm about on this channel, is trying to make this stuff as interesting as possible so that hopefully I can help you get on board with it a little bit earlier if it's something that really helps you. But again, it's not the only way to learn to draw. It's just something that can really help your drawing, especially if you're interested in structure and perspective and rendering, and that relates to the styles that you're interested in. Just quickly, if you're interested in developing your own line and color comic book, manga, bande dessinée style, where we create worlds with simple line and color, you can check out my free quick start guide that goes over my tips and techniques for creating line and color illustrations in Photoshop. I go from the thumbnails to the finished product, and I talk about how you can develop and build your own simple, reliable process. It's free. The link will be in the description. So if we start with the most basic, obvious analysis of this, we can see that obviously a lot of forms that we see in life, you can sort of see my sort of arm here is very, very similar from a structural standpoint to a cylinder. And the idea is that kind of if we learn to draw this, that will kind of help us draw other cylindrical objects, right? like your kind of finger, right, or your arm, or whatever. The same with the sphere, right? Your head is kind of, part sort of spherical, and you can sort of use that to kind of help you understand how that sort of functions. And we can understand, again, how the light is sort of reflected on these objects, and we can then use that to help us draw them from different angles from our imagination. Or that just your basic sort of studying of this will help you at a very technical level with your drawing from reference or drawing from life, because you get to study something that's very simple and do it in a lot of detail. So the theory is kind of obvious, right? I feel like it's one of these things where you can explain it to everyone and everyone's like, of course, right? Sure. Like, I can see how that sort of makes a difference. And that's one of those things that was explained to me very early on. I had someone who was extremely, extremely talented. Again, for people who sort of, like know digital art, it was people like Craig Mullins on forums, a long time ago saying, oh, hey, what I do is sort of quite easy. You just need to learn how to draw geoforms. And, he would be drawing in a very, very realistic matte painting, painterly sort of style. And that's what I wanted to do. And I would have someone who I trusted tell me that, and it would make sense, but I just wouldn't do it. And I found that in most cases, that is the lived experience of artists who get told to do this, is it's just a bit boring and we just kind of don't do it. Now, the thing that I think often people don't talk about is that what's happening as we study these is that we're kind of learning how the world functions and how to represent three-dimensional objects on a two-dimensional page. But a lot of the way that it's actually applied is far less technical than that. Again, there's another big thing that I really, really like to get across on this channel, is that the more technical you study, the less technical you actually have to practice and draw all day, every day. And this has certainly been my experience with it. So I think it is often that connection that's very tricky for people to get in the beginning. And that was certainly my sort of problem with it, is I would start looking at these things and sort of doing the rendering and, like plotting out the perspective and how the shadows go. And I'd say, this is not how I want art to be. This is not what I signed up for. I wanted to draw like, cool comics and things, like this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to draw like, stuff for video games and that kind of stuff. And as soon as I start doing the technical drawing, it doesn't feel like art to me. And what I kind of imagine is sort of, I don't want to go there because I don't want my whole life to just be drawing with a ruler, right? And going on and on about that stuff. So it's really important to understand that what you're sort of doing through studying this is kind of, you're training your subconscious mind. And again, that sounds a little bit sort of esoteric, but I think it's, there's a lot of sort of quasi-science based, maybe not hardcore evidence based science to go with it. But I think we can make a strong case for the fact that when you're kind of drawing, part of what you're training is your subconscious mind, right? Because a lot of what's happening is you're visualizing these forms. So as I go to draw an arm, right, what I'm doing is I'm kind of visualizing the cylinders and as they sort of move in perspective. And because I've drawn a lot of technical ones and I can draw a good one technically, it allows me to better visualize it. And as I visualize it and sort of draw things on the page and see different things on the page, it's my understanding of the basic form that's easy to manipulate and easy to sort of rotate around that helps me to visualize the things that I'm drawing on the page. But often the disconnect is that people will kind of say, as an illustration for how this works, you'll be sort of drawing arms as cylinders, right? And be like, oh, this is a cylinder, right? And, the forearm is sort of one cylinder, right? And the upper arm is kind of another cylinder. And we're kind of making this connection. And what we're trying to do there as drawing teachers is tell you there's a connection. But the way the connection happens in your mind is a lot more fuzzy, in my experience, again, and as much as I've studied it. And often what you see is artists will get better and better at drawing, but it's not that they're sitting there always analytically drawing cylinders perfectly. But visualizing the cylinder will kind of help you to block in the arms at different angles, even if, you add a lot of nuance or detail to that arm, or, you're not just drawing it as a perfect analytical cylinder. It's not always just about breaking it down and having a process where you do draw all the cylinders all the time, although that's a good way to learn, right, and get better at this. But the way these things are actually applied is a little bit more subconscious. So you can think of this as the more of this you learn, the better your overall drawing gets. But the more you sort of practice this with a ruler, you practice doing it in a really technical way, the better that subconscious understanding of the form becomes. So you're teaching your sort of drawing mind, your drawing body to draw. Again, apologies if this is all a little bit sort of woo-woo, but this is how I think a lot of this sort of is functioning. The better you teach that, the better it can visualize form in 3 dimensions. The more accurate it is, the better it is at guessing. The more technical you are with your study of this, the less sort of technical you need to be, because your guesses get better. And what we're trying to do often with drawing is get really good guesses for structure and perspective, right? That's often what you're seeing with a high-level sort of artist who say, the most important thing is for you to study this. But then when they go and draw it, or they go and paint their thing, they're just kind of like doing it by magic. They're visualizing this, and they're saying this is important. What they're doing is often something very different. When they do a drawing demo, they're often actually drawing the basic geoforms, because they're trying to explain to you through the demo how the geoforms relate to the thing that they're drawing. But when they actually do it, and especially when they actually do it and they're not sort of recording or trying to sort of demonstrate it, in my experience, it's a lot less sort of technical, right? Things is just kind of happening here and there, and kind of all of a sudden some sort of drawing emerges. So it's not a one-to-one experience of learning to draw technically and then always drawing technically as you've learnt it. If you learn to draw these things, your drawing will just get better, right? You will just get better at guessing, your structure will get better, your perspective will get better, and there's not going to be any sort of point or way you're going to be able to sort of say, that's why this happened. Your drawing will just get better because you're practicing drawing these technical things, and your model for how accurate and how perspective grids work and how rendering works increases in fidelity, and that just helps all of your drawing in general. The second thing that I think is really important to consider when we're giving and doing technical assignments like this is we're really focusing on what's important. And if you remove the interest and the drama and the emotion from what you're drawing, even though my recommendation is always to practice doing what you actually want to do, because then, again, you'll be building the skills that are important. Often the skills that are important are the things that connect with an audience, and what you'll find is you're able to create work that is technically poor, but people still like. Now again, if you just want to keep doing that, then keep doing that, right? Doesn't matter, it's working. But if you want to sort of get better at these things, then it's actually better to remove all of the emotion, all of the interest. And what you do is you kind of reduce, you sort of decrease the range of possible success. The only way to make this good is to draw it technically well. You can't make it interesting by putting a face on it. You can't make it interesting by making it dramatic. The only thing we're looking for is for you to be able to draw this from your imagination and make it look realistic. And to a certain degree, even if you succeed, you're still going to be drawing something boring that no one cares about. What this does is it allows us more easily to focus on the process and the technicalities. If you're trying to improve your technical drawing and you're having real trouble through just kind of practice, often what's happening is you may be drawing something interesting that requires form and perspective, but you're able to kind of cheat, maybe not make the perspective that good, but give it a lot of emotion, give it a lot of drama. And you're solving the interest problem, right, just by sort of making, like, if someone viewing it and thinking, is that cool or not, by kind of just making the drawing interesting. And again, that's something that's a skill you need to work on as well, because making it interesting is super important. But by removing all of that and just making it boring, it's very, very easy to focus on and see and spot the mistakes that you're making. this is where it's tricky, because that's kind of not what we want to do as artists. And it's almost like that skill is not what we want to do in general. You want to make things interesting. You want to make things aspirational, cool. You want to tell stories. And this kind of says, no, you can't, right? You can't tell stories with this. It's boring. The only value this has is in your skill acquisition. The only value is, how does this help you draw that other interesting stuff? But it allows us to hone in on the craft in a way that's not possible. And you can see through your ability to accurately represent these things and learn to draw them, how your technical craft is going. So you're going to see things like line quality, line accuracy. You're going to see the general structure, your ability to perceive a perspective grid, your ability to just manipulate and use the tools that you're using, whatever they may be. It could be, again, graphite and charcoal, or it could be using Photoshop, and understanding how do you get a straight line in Photoshop? How do you, create a nice gradient, right, along a plane, right? If you have like sort of a shadow or something like that cast along it, you can see sort of the shadows cast here, or, a variety of things. You can see, sort of the ambient occlusion that sort of, starts to sort of occur, as sort of two forms meet, etc. There's understanding it, right? Understanding the theory, but there's also the application, which is often just a technical application. It's the craft-based stuff. What I tend to find is that this will kind of flush out a lot of really obvious things with people who are beginning, and give us a ton of things to work on. A lot of people have, real trouble drawing a straight line, and even when you give them a ruler and a pencil, they're still kind of struggling to do it. And this will kind of just immediately highlight that. Hey, you're trying to draw a straight line, not a curved one, and you can't. Now you can choose to do a wobbly line, right? Often you see the lines that I do are kind of quite wobbly. I'm never sort of drawing straight lines. I'm not after that. But if I'm doing this, I know how to draw a straight line in Photoshop. I know how to do it. I know how to get a ruler. And it's often those things that you sort of take for granted, but if you haven't actually figured out how to achieve a particular goal like that, again, how to mask off something in Photoshop, how to get a clean line, right? Often these things are about, masking off surfaces in a digital sort of art application, or actually creating a physical mask if you're doing it with charcoal, so that you can get those smooth gradients, right? There's a technical aspect to the craft where this will kind of immediately highlight where your craft is lacking. And if you're drawing something interesting or cool, that won't be highlighted, because people will just say, oh yeah, it's kind of, it's not that well drawn, but it's interesting, I like it. And so, you're never going to get to that sort of nth degree of your craft. You're never going to really get to focus on it as much as maybe you would like. So the last thing that I want to talk about before giving you some tips for how to actually apply this is that what I found as a drawing teacher that I can sort of share with you is that mistakes you're probably going to make if you just try and draw a simple geoform, insofar as you're making common mistakes, i.e. an inability to draw a straight line, an inability to just focus and draw a perspective grid properly, an inability to get a smooth gradient, an inability to understand how the masking systems and the layers would function in Photoshop to facilitate those. I can almost guarantee you're making the exact same mistakes in the rest of your work, because that's what I've seen in almost all cases. Mistakes people make here are being made everywhere else, but they're very easy to see here, and it's very easy, especially in a teaching environment, to spot them here. But it's also easy for you to spot them, because you really can see them. This is a good way for you to not hide under a lot of the other stylistic, again, emotional things that you might be doing with your art. It really sort of makes you focus and makes it very, very clear what is working and what's not. So, for instance, just as an example, one of the things that people most struggle with when they're beginning and they're trying to paint is blocking in the painting, is getting the general values and the general color right in the beginning. And what that means is when you're sort of painting something, typically what you want to do if you're sort of painting a face like my face, you're going to have different values around the face, different sort of, my hair is going to be darker, right? Eyebrows are going to be darker. Again, the lighting here is kind of flat, it's not a lot of form. But what you're going to be doing is trying to sort of block in all those values. Typically, what you need to do is block them all in first with some level of sort of logic or system. And what that will do is allow you to then start see the form and the light, and you can then start to finesse that. But the blocking in phase is really important. And if you looked at any tutorials, or you've sort of taught or learnt anything about painting, the blocking in phase, the initial phase where you kind of get it all sort of sorted, is really, really important. And what I notice is people who have trouble blocking in a cube also have trouble blocking in everything else. And it's almost a matter of like, we can do this sort of 10 times and they're still having trouble blocking it in. What they'll do is kind of, maybe block in like sort of this value, right, and this value, but maybe they'll kind of just do like this one and this one, right, or they won't get them to sort of relate first. And you can almost guarantee if people aren't sort of trying to separate or get a good 1, 2, 3 read on a cube when they're trying to render, that they're not getting good 1, 2, 3 reads on anything they do. And I've seen that again. It's like I can almost guarantee it, that that's happening. And the same for perspective, the same for being able to draw straight lines, right? It will highlight areas of your craft and your basic understanding of art very, very simply that your other sort of paintings and things you're doing just aren't. When you're trying to block in a painting, there's a million reasons why it could be sucking, right? And in most cases, it's because you're not blocking in the values correctly to begin with, right? That's one of those things that's often critiqued. But it could be because of the composition. It could be because you're not drawing the anatomy well. It could be because your visual library for what you're drawing is not good. There's a whole other range of things that are affecting it. And if we just allow ourselves to focus on one or two things, it's actually a good way to troubleshoot where to go on your art, especially if you're, sort of doing this a little bit more solo. You're not out of school, you're trying to figure it out on your own. If you can't make this look three-dimensional, it's very unlikely you're just magically going to be able to make other things three-dimensional. And again, if you understand how to render these things, you can do them very, very quickly in any medium whatsoever. So it's really a matter of highlighting and using this as a troubleshooting method to see what else might be going wrong in your art. So let me give you some tips for how to apply this. The first is, as I've said before, don't spend too much time on these kind of drawing or rendering exercises. I think it's really, really important to do a little bit over a long time. And I've said this for many drawing exercises. The reason is we're learning a physically based skill. We're in a physical, visual learning modality, similar to riding a bike, learning to dance, learning martial arts, learning to throw balls, learning sport. What this means is that a lot of what we're learning is our body understanding how to draw a straight line. It's our mind sort of getting our head around how to block in form. There's an intellectual part of it, but again, I can tell people till I'm blue in the face, you need to block it in, you need a good 1, 2, 3 read. Their body has to actually learn to do it. You have to learn the sequence. There has to be a sequence and understanding that's kind of personal to you. It's how you apply that stuff to your own process. What do you do first? Do you block in the darks first or the lights first? Do you have a sequence? How do you do it? There's quite a variety of ways that are sort of personal to you. And kind of what you're doing is teaching your physical self as well as your mental self. It's your physical self that learns how to draw a straight line. I can tell you, I can give you the exercise. I can tell you how to hold the pencil, how to, move your shoulder. It's not going to make any difference. You need to practice it and you need to sleep so that now that knowledge becomes assimilated into your sort of somatic, visual, mental body self, right? It becomes something you do. Exactly the same as riding a bike. It's the kind of thing where you find you can just sometimes wake up and you're better at riding your bike when you're a kid one day versus the previous day, and it's because it's your sort of subconscious mind is assimilating and adapting that information. If you just kind of keep riding your bike, eventually you just kind of start falling over more because you get fatigued and you're not really learning anything more. There's probably what you would consider a rate of neurological adaptation that can occur per day based on a sleep cycle of you assimilating that sort of intellectual information into your body. Again, this is just my sort of way of viewing it as metaphorical sort of conjecture, but that's my understanding of how this works. It's very, very similar to those processes. So a little bit every day goes a long way, and smashing this till your fingers and your eyes bleed is pretty much a waste of time, right? It's just not going to be the most effective way to do this. So do a little bit, have fun with it, and fold it into your other work. That's my number one tip. The other thing is to apply it. And as soon as you can kind of draw some of these things a little bit more technical, actually try and sort of visualize them and try to apply it to what you're doing. So as I often say, you can sort of learn to draw technically something like this, and you can get better at it and better at it and better at it. But the more you can apply it into, how to draw a tree, right? How to draw a gun barrel, how to draw a spaceship, or sort of thruster rocket or something. And how you can practice sort of visualizing that thing you want to draw and then simplifying it and drawing it in perspective. The more you can do that and the sooner you can do that, the better. Because at its core, the skill we're trying to learn is not necessarily sitting down there with a ruler or, doing anything too technical. What you're mostly trying to do is get better at visualizing these forms moving in 3 dimensions and then drawing them in and being able to kind of connect them up and again understand how they might relate to each other if they're kind of linked in space, etc. So a lot of it is about sort of visualizing what you actually want to draw and trying to apply it to what you actually want to draw. The separating it out, making it abstract is really, really important because again it removes all of those crutches. It allows you to focus, but then you need to again apply it back. So if we look at that prior example where we're trying to block in values on a painting, you might try and really separate that out and get good at blocking in a cube, right? And understanding your 1, 2, 3 reads and your value assignments, etc. Then go try and do a similar thing when you're actually painting, right? So you're doing your sort of personal work or whatever you're trying to do. Try and apply those same concepts directly to what you're doing and work on the visualization, right? And again, working on building those skills and making sure your brain is adapting and your mind is adapting to actually applying those things to what you want to do as well. And the last tip is that the main point of this is not just that you get good at drawing a random silly cylinder. It's completely pointless. And what this exercise of understanding your basic geoforms is there for is to comprehend how if we learn how to draw this really well, we can sort of draw anything cylindrical. And if we look at all the cylindrical things in life, as I said, you've got sort of arms in anatomy, right? You've got your sort of spherical forms in anatomy, etc., etc. The key is to try and observe the world and observe life and try and extract from life and the world how that thing breaks down into this simple form as well. So again, there's 2 sides of this. One is that doing these exercises will help you get better at the technical side of art. And then there's also the idea that everything in the world is made up from these simple forms. And if you can draw one simple form, then you can draw many things. The trick, though, is to get good and used to looking at the world and breaking it down into simple forms. Now, there are systems for anatomy that kind of go over like, hey, again, the arm is a cylinder, right? The head, we can kind of, again, using something like the Loomis method, it's almost like, we start with a sphere. So understanding the geometry of a sphere is useful. But at its core, you need to learn how to break down the world yourself in your own particular way. You can try and learn other people's systems, but if you just get really good at looking at things and say, oh, that's kind of like just a basic square, right? You look at this and you kind of understand how to extract basic forms from it. That really is the secondary sort of lesson here. And again, it's not something that I think you should worry about if you're not initially just getting. If you're not initially like, oh, I get this, sounds good, Tim, cool, I'll go do it. And then immediately you're kind of like, I'm not quite sure about this. That's fine. That's normal. Just keep doing it. Do a bit of it. Have fun with it. Try and apply it. As I said, I think a lot of people really, really struggle with this early on, and I think there's good reason. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense. It's tricky to understand how that is going to relate to, again, being able to draw, cool stuff. And it kind of just does, but it happens over time. So don't freak out if it's not immediately making sense to you or immediately working. And I'll always remember, again, the story that I tell where I have like a colleague and a friend of mine who is also a drawing teacher and, you know, a very, very talented, successful artist. And I just remember distinctly him coming to one of our sort of sketch meetup things and kind of saying like, he just had an epiphany. Someone who's been working professionally for over a decade. And he was kind of like, you know what, guys? It's all simple forms. It's all just these simple forms. And you could tell he's kind of like, and we're like, yeah, we know. Like, dude, we're all drawing teachers. We get this. And he's like, no, but really, it's all simple forms. And we're like, yeah. It's like, no, but I figured it out. Like, I got it, you know. And he kind of really got it, right? At a deep level. He was like, no, I really understand it now. And the point there is that it can take a while, and that's fine, and that's natural. There's a resistance to these things where you have to try it and you have to prove it to yourself, and there are degrees and levels of understanding of the depth and the simplicity here. Very similar to a lot of other physical-based learning modalities like sport, right? Once you get to a certain point, you are less focused on the minutiae and you can sort of see the patterns that evolve and the simplicities that might evolve out of simple skills. And again, the deeper you understand these things, the easier it is to apply them, the more fun you have. So it's not just one of these basic level concepts where you're just saying, oh, I get it, okay, like tick, right? It's one of these sort of truths that we understand through art, and you can interact with this as much or as little as you like, but it may take time, and that's totally fine. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Hopefully this has been interesting. Let me know if you've got any other questions about drawing geoforms. We might do some sort of, you know, simple exercises for this in the future on the channel. So let me know if that would be interesting. Any particular things you have questions on, or if you've had experiences with trying this and then sort of hating it because it's super boring. Let me know. I know a lot of people have that. I had that in the beginning, but trust me, it's worth it. But anyway, that's all I've got. Catch you around. Happy drawing.